So what I wanted to do today was just briefly go over the project again, so that we can all have the same understanding of what the outcomes are that we're expecting to see from the project. But first I wanted to just revisit what we discussed at the last meeting. And so how many of you were here at the last consortium meeting? So a fair number of you. In case you wanted to see again what happened, you can look on our website where we have a video of that meeting available. But at the last meeting, for those of you who weren't here, we reviewed the project scope and the tasks that we included in the grant application for the project. And so we did that in some detail. And we reviewed how this project is really intertwined with the Metropolitan Transportation Plan project that we have at SACOG. And that's really important because we received this grant when we were halfway through our MTP update. And so it's not a typical project where we're suddenly expanding the scope when we're trying to update our transportation plan. But as we go through this presentation, you'll be able to see how we can collect your input and put that in places other than our transportation plan in the outcomes from this project. We also had a presentation from the UC Davis Center for Regional Change on some of the indicator ideas that they've worked with in the past to look at equity in the region and to look at how we measure the impacts to equity. So today I'm going to turn it backwards and try and start with a vision. And so turn the grant program, see if I can describe it to you backwards and see if that might make more sense to some folks here. And so this is the planner's vision, the dream vision of what a transit priority area, what a complete community might look like in the future. And so in planning for this, what type of planning did it take to get those housing choices for both market rate and affordable housing near transit? How did the planners consider the development of both purchased units for those who want to own their units and the renter units for people who want to live near transit? What types of walking access were available to get to transit? And that is a bus there you see creeping around the corner waiting to take anyone to exactly where they want to be within 10 minutes. So that's the planner's vision. But what types of consideration went into that vision to make sure that the transit was taking people to where they needed to go? And how do we make sure that there were opportunities to walk and bike to within in that community? What types of economic development programs needed to be considered to attract the businesses to this vision? And then underground and on the streets, what type of transportation system did we need for maybe a higher intensity transit priority area vision? What types of infrastructure planning happened underground? And so as we go through this grant program, how do we integrate those planning efforts? How do we uncover those planning efforts through the working group process so that we're not only planning for the urban area, but we're also recognizing the natural resource protection that we need in our region, and also promoting the amenities, the great amenities that we have in our region, which is access to recreation and access to this beautiful open space in this great agricultural region that we have here. And so those were the three major work tasks in the grant, which is how do we screen for transit priority areas, how do we plan for housing, and then how do we plan for natural resource protection. But there's also three major work activities in this grant program where your work on the working groups will go as we move through this process. And so the first item up is this transit priority area screening that you're hearing about, and I'll get to that in a little more detail in a minute. But that really needs to be done by June to fit into our transportation plan process. And that's where we're going to ask you for what considerations do we need to include in reviewing the transit areas in our region to see which are the most ripe for further planning consideration in this 4-year plan that we're developing. It's a 25-year plan, but in the 4 years that we're working with right now for this planning cycle. Some of the issues that you give us might not fit into that transit priority area. It might be regional topics that you provide that might more appropriately be considered in our metropolitan transportation plan. And so as we hear about the issues that we'll get from you later today, in the topics that you'd like us to investigate, they might fit into that analysis for the MTP. And so anything that we have coming in, we can include probably through the September, October, November timeframe in our MTP analysis. But some issues aren't always transportation related. They might be equity issues about more senior services that are needed in parts of the region, or issues around housing that fit into other planning processes that we discuss in these working groups and in this consortium meeting. And so those go into this regional plan for sustainable development, which is the outcome from our grant process. And so that we'll have this plan that we'll have at the end of it, which is really a guide to planning efforts in the region to show where there's opportunities to integrate all of the work that our member jurisdictions and that our partner agencies are doing to show how we can make the best use of all of our planning efforts and all of our planning dollars in this new economy. So what does it mean to screen a transit priority area? That's, I know, a topic that some of you have struggled with. And so we have this vision, and you're some of the first to see what is likely our draft transit priority area for the 2035 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. This will go to our board of directors, our committees, when we take them our preferred alternative here in the next couple months. But we need to get something on a map so that you can see what it looks like. And so how do we look within those areas that are in the light gray and in the dark gray to say which of these areas are most ready for further analysis? In the steering committee with our grant partners, we've named it the Goldilocks problem. Is that some areas are too hot, some are too ready for development, and some have done all of their environmental analysis, their economic development planning, all of their outreach to their communities, and so all of the planning efforts are done for these areas, and this process really can't add that much to their planning process. We have some areas that are too cold, where this might be the first time that they've considered transit 25 years out into the future coming to this community, or coming with the increased service levels that we're expecting to see out in 2035, and so they don't have land use plans that are adopted by their local jurisdictions yet, and they just aren't ready for deeper consideration in our planning process. So how do we first identify those areas that are just right? How do we pick those areas in the middle that might have both needs that we need to uncover in this planning process, needs that we can help fill in when we get to what we call the transit priority area action plans, where we go out, we look at 4 or 5 areas that we will help us screen in this process, screen out that big area into 4 or 5 areas around transit that are most ready for development. And so how do we identify what the needs are in those areas, where we can provide benefit to those areas and say fill in some of those planning gaps, but also where do we find the areas that can provide opportunities to the region if they can realize complete plans and hopefully attract development in this 4 to 5 year planning cycle before we update our transportation plan again. And so it's really that tension between opportunities and needs that you'll be helping us uncover in the working groups as we go through the process. And so the working groups are really where the content for this program gets developed. And the working groups will ask you to break out into the working groups a little bit later today. But in these 4 groups, the infrastructure planning group, the economic development group, the housing, health, and public health and equity planning group, and the natural resources group, you will help us discuss and uncover the topics that we should be considering in this process. You'll help us realize other planning efforts that we may not be aware of that are going on in the region, private sector investment that might be happening. And so how do we build those integrated planning efforts and then bring that to the table back into those 3 areas, the transit priority area screening that'll happen in May and June, the MTP analysis that will happen over the summer and be released in November, and then in the regional plan for sustainable development that we'll produce by June of 2012. So that's a short overview of the grant process that we're going through here. We're next going to have Monica Hernandez come up, and we're going to talk about some of the goals, and then we'll have time for some of your questions. But we wanted to make sure that we're clear on the outcomes of the grant, and then clear on the goals that we're trying to achieve with this planning process. Thank you.